Good afternoon, everyone. Sounds like good conversation. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Economic Club of Florida's 587th meeting and our continuing Distinguished Speaker Series. My name is Chris Emanuel, and I have the honor to be our club's president. For right now, if everyone could please silence their phones or turn anything that buzzes or beeps to stun. Please note that this is being live streamed. We have a number of our members that are tuning in, so it's good to see you, and looking forward to the questions that may be done in person or through the chat window there. And please join me in standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Today we are honored to have Nick Wiley, the COO of Ducks Unlimited, and this is a bit of a homecoming for him. We'll let one of our other panelists up here do the formal introduction. Dr. James Walton will be the one to formally introduce our speaker. A little bit more housekeeping. On March 20th, we will have Mr. Phil Goodman over at Capital City Country Club, so please be on the lookout in your emails and on the website for the time there. The Economic Club of Florida is, of course, a membership-sponsored and driven organization, and I'd like to recognize our trustees. First, I'd like to start with our newest trustee, Josh Walters is here. Thank you very much for joining. And for all the other trustees, please stand and be honored for your additional commitment. In addition to our trustees, we have a variety of volunteers. There's one volunteer that I would like to recognize. It's Brian Rowland. Last year, we had a speaker from the Guy Harvey Foundation that invited our members down to a fishing trip in Guatemala. We have 8 spots available. If you're interested on doing what appears to be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to learn and to fish on some of the most beautiful coastline and ocean in the world, please see him afterwards. As is tradition, now I would like to go around the room and introduce our guests. Do we have any guests at this table over here? Over here. I'm having a hard time seeing any. Do we have any guests in the middle here?
I have Frank Shaw with me, my brother-in-law, avid duck hunter.
Fantastic, welcome. Any guests on this column here? All right, at this time, I'll be introducing him in just a moment, if that's all right.
Sure.
Well, that's good. I'll go on this side and have you do the introduction, if that works for you. All right. I'd like to introduce the head table now. To my right, your left, is Sam Rogers of Hub International. He is a fixture of the Tallahassee community and has been involved in numerous organizations. We also have Ashley Bess. She is an intern in my office at the University of Florida's Government and Community Relations. She is graduating in May and looking for a job in Tallahassee. So if anybody knows or anyone hiring, come and see her afterwards. And with that, I would love to do the introductions of the table here. What's the right way to do this?
I have a guest, Dean Massey. Dean is the president of EMT eLink, your sponsoring company for the day. And he's probably going to say just a few things about it in a couple of minutes. But proud to have him here. He's been a friend and a business companion for some period of time.
Perfect. Well, that's a great segue. Mr. Massey, thank you for your support of this organization. We'd love for you to say a few remarks this time.
Well, good morning. We're so happy to be honored to sponsor this today. Dr. J and I, Dr. J mostly has been a member of DU for about 54 years. So we're very heavily involved. I'm a member as well. When we started EMT Link about 6 years ago, Our aim was to save lives through technology. Dr. Walton is a practicing dentist here in Tallahassee, and I was on his staff as far as an IT person. The biggest frustration for him and for other physicians and dental people are the lack of knowledge for people knowing what medication they're taking. So that was our main goal, was to have people carry their medical information with them at all times. So we've developed an app that goes on your phone. The data goes into the cloud, into our Azure healthcare database, which is HIPAA compliant, and you can upload all your medical information to this app, and we can send to each of your doctors a certified HIPAA form that requests your medical records, so they can send it to us either by email or secure email or secure fax. And our portal will do everything. Then we will take that and place that information into your portal, so you can have all your medical records from all your doctors in one location. It was also, for us to do this, we have a place so you can also add all your medication, your allergies, your emergency contacts, your driver's license, insurance information, and medication, or medical conditions, and doctors and providers. I'm not sure if all of you are carrying your medical information with you at all times. If not, I encourage you to do so in some fashion. I didn't know that whenever we started this, that my life would have been saved with the information on my phone. I had a heart attack. They took me to the hospital. They were going to wait to the next day to do the procedure, but I pulled my phone out and gave them all of my medication, because I have cancer, I've got high blood pressure, got all the other stuff that goes along with a veteran. And they decided to go ahead and do the procedure that night. After they got through the procedure, they indicated that my heart was 80 to 90% blocked. They put 3 stents in, and the doctor wanted to know where we got that out. So we indicated what we did with it. And he said if we hadn't done the procedure that night, the outcome would have been a lot different. So we encourage you to start looking at something that we have that will help save your life. So if you go to EMT eLink, you will see what we provide, how we provide it, and that we are HIPAA compliant, and it will save your life. That's all I got.
Thank you for that, and for the support of the Economic Club of Florida. With this, I'd like to invite Dr. Walton up to introduce our speaker.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Chris. Very quickly, I was there the night he had the heart attack. I was in the hospital. I watched the lower half of his heart, which was completely devoid of any blood supply at all, begin to rejuvenate and look like all these little spiders going back into it. So I can tell you that for him and for several others, it was life-saving. I'm absolutely delighted to be able to bring to you Nick Wiley this afternoon. If you've read his curriculum vitae, which you probably have, you've seen it on the emails that have gone out, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time doing it. Suffice it to say that he started out here in Florida and worked with the FWC for 30 years and received a number of awards in doing so. He graduated from Georgia Southern and has also a master's from Auburn University. He's moved up the line, and Ducks Unlimited was extremely fortunate to be able to attract him to our organization. I've been a member for 54 years, and I can tell you that when you are of like mind and you're trying to do things environmentally, not just save ducks to hunt them, but to get clean water and fresh air. I talk to people sometime and they say, well, I don't want to join Ducks Unlimited. You just raise the ducks so you can shoot them. And that's the way it started out. That's exactly right. Almost 80 some odd years ago now. But it's morphed. And you may not like to hunt, but you do like to breathe clean air, and you do like to drink clean water. And that is becoming more and more what DU is about. So I would encourage you all, if you're not members, I am making a pitch right here and now for everybody here to become just a basic member. It's a great organization. And when you're in an organization like this, you develop wonderful friends. And I am proud to be able to call Nick Wiley my friend. So with that, I'm going to let Nick come up and give you a little education. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. J, and I am so happy to be back home. And about 7 years ago, I moved up to Memphis to work with Ducks Unlimited. And then about a year later, our friend Adam Putnam came up as our CEO, and we've been having a wonderful time. We're just having fun doing what we do and working with Ducks Unlimited, being a part of that. They welcomed us as part of that family, and we're loving it. Adam sends his warm regards. I think he's spoken to this forum twice now. So I'm thrilled to be here, thrilled to be back home, and I love that we've got some duck hunters and DU members and volunteers in the audience. What I want to do, those of you that don't know much about DU, I'm going to tee up a quick video. We just did this just a few weeks ago, and it really tells our story in a really crisp way. So I'd love for you to just sit back a minute, watch this video, and then I'll come up and we'll start talking about some of the things that are going on in Florida.
Leader in wetlands conservation. Since 1937, we've delivered conservation on tens of millions of acres across North America.
Our mission is simple: to deliver wetlands conservation for waterfowl, wildlife, and people. But behind that mission is a robust ecosystem built on science, partnerships, and people like you.
Together, we protect the places that matter most. Wetlands support the life cycles of waterfowl and wildlife, filter and provide clean water, reduce flooding, and even help store carbon.
But our efforts aren't possible without the dedicated people who make it happen. Our volunteers and supporters raise essential funds, forming the backbone of every wetland project we undertake.
Science is our foundation. Ducks Unlimited's biologists collaborate closely with landowners and farmers to restore wetlands and improve waterfowl habitats. These partnerships ensure that solid data and sustainable practices inform every project.
DU's partnerships with corporations and conservation groups amplify every dollar we raise. These leveraged funds enhance Ducks Unlimited's resources, enabling us to achieve more collectively than we could alone.
Ducks Unlimited collaborates with lawmakers at all levels to advocate for protecting wetlands and wildlife. These policies secure funding, safeguard critical habitats, and ensure our project's long-term success.
DU's fundraising events motivate immediate action and connect communities to our mission. Through banquets, auctions, and gatherings, we raise essential funds and foster a strong community dedicated to conservation. Each event supports Ducks Unlimited's efforts, which protect the most critical lands for waterfowl, wildlife, and people.
Landowners play an essential role in conserving our natural landscapes. By partnering with Ducks Unlimited, they protect their land through conservation easements, ensuring these habitats remain safe for wildlife forever.
Through our ambitious Conservation for Our Continent $3 billion capital campaign, we've set a new standard. delivering conservation on over 1 million acres of wetlands in just 1 year.
The impact of this campaign was magnified by a historic $100 million gift from Cox Enterprises. DU's partnership with Cox Enterprises has transformed the scale of our conservation work.
This monumental contribution is a long-term investment in the future of wetlands, wildlife, and the natural spaces we rely on. And we're just getting started.
Our mission is far from over. Your support is crucial.
Join us today to help protect our wetlands and to ensure a healthy future for our communities.
So y'all could see how happy Adam looked in that video, and we are both smiling a lot these days. And we miss Florida, we really do. But one thing we talked about when Adam came in is how can we increase our footprint, our work in the state of Florida. When I was working with FWC, I kind of struggled to get DU's attention, to come work in Florida. We have DU's attention now. And some great things are happening across the country and in Florida. And I will say that Dr. J is serious about this, that it's only $35 to become a member, and you might get a cool hat or a vest or something with that. So please go online, ducks.org, and join up and be a member and get involved. It's really a lot of fun. But now I want to turn attention to Florida, and the subject today is a little broader than just DU's mission. It's about really where we are with the state of Florida as far as taking care of wild Florida, taking care of the places and the wildlife and the fisheries. And I've spent a lot of time in my career with a focus on that, and it's near and dear to my heart. But many of you are aware of some of the challenges with growth and development and how Florida has just blossomed. And I want to start by saying growth is good. This is not an anti-growth. This is about balancing growth and the environment and conservation and wildlife and all those things we care about. It can be done. And those are kind of things I want to talk about today, taking care of wild Florida. So first, what is wild Florida? And the trends in Florida with growth are actually going to encroach and have been on wild Florida and the places we care about. 1,000 Friends of Florida has done a lot of good work in this regard, kind of projecting out. This is a baseline from 2010, but what I want to do is show you what the projection is out to 2070, what Florida is going to look like as far as growth. I'm going to toggle back and forth. That's projecting an additional about 15 million people between now and 2070. And so you just keep an eye on the places that are special to you in Florida and where you go out and enjoy wild Florida and think about what that might mean. And I'm going to try to drill down a little more into kind of how we can look at this and manage and work to take care of the things we care about and keep Florida special. So it is stunning, though, to see what it's going to take to accommodate that many people, and not to mention the wild places, but water supplies and things like that. And I know the state is actively working and has been. It's not like all of a sudden we woke up in Florida and said, oh, we got to deal with this. It's been happening now for a long time. So let's talk. What do you think about when you think of wild Florida? What comes to mind? And from a biologist perspective, we think about functioning, living ecosystems. It's not like you can have backyard wildlife. You can have a cardinal at your feeder. You can have a few ducks in the pond behind your house. But that is not a functioning ecosystem. That's not a place where all the natural processes that provide food and cover and habitat for wildlife, that's not where that's going to happen. You have to protect significant lands and manage it and take care of it to have a functioning ecosystem where, and all the functioning parts of the ecosystem are how the water flows through that system, which is where Ducks Unlimited focuses a lot of its time and attention, to restore the water resources to natural lands and landscapes. You want those natural water flows. You want to restore natural processes like prescribed fire. I'm sure you've all heard about how important prescribed burning is to most Florida landscapes. And our Tall Timbers right up the road has done a great job of preaching the word about how important that is. And so a functioning living ecosystem requires, one, protect large swaths of land, keep those pieces of land connected with each other so that those species that require those functioning ecosystems can live and be sustained and be managed. And so that gets me to sustaining fish and wildlife habitat. You've got to be able to not only protect it, but to keep it in a good shape and functioning. And the cool thing about this is some of the most important landscapes in Florida, such as our working ranch and ag lands, are really compatible components of living ecosystems. You can readily integrate agriculture and ranching lands into really productive living ecosystems that support our fish and wildlife and also our wild Florida. But also from an economic perspective, you're getting both. It's a win-win situation. You're getting wild Florida protected and you're getting agricultural benefits. And then I got to mention, we're here, your name has economy in it, so I got to mention how important wild Florida is to our tourism economy. It's a goose that lays our golden eggs in Florida, and we have to take care of that. We know that. Florida knows that, and it's so central to what we care about and what we see when we think about how special Florida is and why a lot of reasons people want to come to Florida. I mean, there are a lot of reasons, but that's a big one. And also talking about water supply, clean water. Those wild lands are where our water is filtered and stored and then filters in the aquifer, recharges our aquifer, and provides that water supply, clean water for us and for our communities. So wild Florida, a lot of reasons to love wild Florida and want to protect it. And here's the pressure. Is this wild Florida? Okay, it's named Wild Florida, but really, that's not the future of wild Florida we're looking for. Right? This has its place, right? But this is wild Florida. This is a landscape where you get your water recharged, where you have wildlife, sustainable ecosystem functions in these type of landscapes. This is wild Florida, our coastal communities, our coastal habitats that are so important to our fisheries and all our wildlife resources. How many of you enjoy getting out in a kayak on one of our springs? I mean, it's just magical, isn't it? Our spring systems, and we're doing a lot to try to protect our springs in Florida. That's the one big thing I miss, because in Memphis, I didn't realize this, Memphis, all the water's really muddy. You don't realize how much you love Florida till you move away for a while. And again, back to working lands. This is wild Florida, but you see a herd of cows right in the middle. This is all how it all fits together, and a lot of reasons. You protect agriculture, you protect working landscapes, you protect wild Florida. And again, just thinking about what wild Florida looks like and what we need to do to try to manage encroachment and manage all the pressures on wild Florida. And I'm here really my training is as a wildlife biologist. And people love wildlife. And people are drawn to wild places. They want to see wildlife. They want to see a deer. They want to see a turkey. They maybe want to see a bear. They love what we have, a panther. It's like magical stuff. And some people in the audience like to kind of chase them with a shotgun. And that's okay too. We love that. But people connect with our wild places a lot of times through our wildlife. And in my career with FWC, that held true forever. Just one day, just asked me how the whole bear hunting thing went when I was here. So we know how much people in Florida love wildlife. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a kind of, when you think about wild places and wildlife, we try to drill it down into what does it mean as far as habitat when we talk about wildlife habitat. So the average home range of a black bear is 25,000 acres. Put this in perspective. Out through 2070, they're projecting we're going to lose about 5 million acres to development to accommodate growth, and 1 to 2 million of that will probably be conservation land, wild land, and another 3 million acres or so is probably going to be ag land. So think about 5 million acres, ag land, wild land, conservation. What does that mean to wildlife? So for a bear to make a living and sustain a population, you need about 25,000 core acres. And then you start looking at other species of wildlife that depend on those habitats. Now, all these critters require different kind of habitats and different kind of management. It's not like this is oversimplified, but if you kind of just run the numbers and you look at species like a bobwhite quail, there is no better indicator in my book than a wild bob white. If you hear a wild bob white call, more than likely you found a wild place, because they just can't thrive in areas that have been highly disrupted, developed, or whatever. They need these natural functioning ecosystems to survive. So if you find a place and you hear that call or you see that covey flush, you found a part of wild Florida that's special. And so if you go down and then see the habitat, the things that are required for a quail and a bear and a fox and a deer, the habitat, the plants and insects and things that are like the things you don't think about a lot are critical to providing a food base, cover, habitat for this wildlife we love to make a living. So that's your Wildlife Biology 101 lesson. I want to now pivot to kind of the things that really matter for wild Florida and how far we've come and the things that we can continue to do to support wild Florida and make a difference. Every one of you and the things you think about and the things you support as Florida navigates legislative sessions and where the funding goes. These are things to think about. And one thing that's really important to that map I showed you and all those green and red, the green spaces were protected land. Federal, state, local government, and conservation organizations have protected that land through acquisition, easements, or other terms of protection so that it won't be developed and can provide habitat for the long term. So Florida, with Florida Forever and P2000 and all those back in the day for 40 years, has planted a flag in the ground and said, we're going to protect wild Florida. We're going to take care of wild Florida. Honestly, I've been all over the nation, and I've met with people in conservation in just about every state. And nobody does this better than Florida. And I'm proud to say that. I don't tell them that, but it's true. Nobody has made a better, stronger, long-term investment in protecting wild Florida over the past 40 plus years than we have. And you all are a part of that as citizens and participating in this. And, you know, at one point we were investing $300 million a year in land acquisition. And you do have to worry about, you know, and think about when do we have enough? And how can we be more strategic? And I'll talk more about that. But continuing that investment in protecting, acquiring land that is meaningful habitat, functioning ecosystems is really critical. There are still places that we need to protect. And Florida's being pretty smart about it. And that's pretty cool to see. But we need to keep that piece of this pie. And it's also so important for public awareness and support. People that have an opportunity to go out and visit a state park, a wildlife management area, a national forest, a fish and wildlife refuge, when you can go visit and see it and feel it and kayak down that spring run, you get it. You fall in love with it and you care. And if we don't have this base of public lands that give people a way to connect with what we're protecting, we're going to lose the public and that public awareness. But the cool thing is, I think we have that strong in Florida, the public support for protecting and conserving land. And also another message that we've tried to, when I was here working with the agency and as Ducks Unlimited, we always try to make sure people are aware of the economic values and economic benefits of having protected lands like a state park or a management area or a national park, and how much that means to the economy of local communities, rural communities that need an economic. And there's pros and cons. You know, sometimes it impacts their tax base, but also it brings in a lot of economic activity because you manage those lands. You bring in contractors, you bring in work, you bring in things that these type of lands can provide. And the cool thing about that economic balance and the economic benefit trade-off is these public lands, these protected lands, these wild lands don't require all the services that the more developed lands require. That when you build a neighborhood, you got to bring services, you got to bring transportation, you got to bring hospitals, you got to bring schools. These protected public lands bring economic benefits without a lot of the other cost side of the equation. That's about as much economics. I don't think I even took an economics class in school, so I'm not going to go much deeper. Another really critical part of the equation that often is kind of maybe overlooked, maybe taken for granted, is private lands. And Florida is so fortunate to have so many. We are right now, when you think back to that map, we have a lot of private lands working lands, ag lands, and just landowners that want to have a place to go and enjoy the outdoors, that are investing in farms and ranches. And these private lands, working lands, are a critical piece of this balance and balancing growth, because these are the people that often, as development kind of starts growing out from urban areas, suburban areas, they're on the edge of that, and often they have to make a decision. Am I going to sell this for the value of development, or am I going to keep it? And am I going to keep managing it for conservation? Our job and our focus at Ducks Unlimited and other conservation groups is to find ways to incentivize and to help them get close to that economic trade-off, so that we can make the value of conservation to that landowner as close as we can get it to the value of development. Most of the time, we can't compete with development value. So if a landowner's just it's a bottom line decision, we can't beat that. But oftentimes, with the value of a conservation easement, with payments for ecosystem services, we can actually, nowadays, we can pay them to do management on their land. FWC's just implemented the last couple of years where a landowner can get payment if they're managing habitat for a Florida panther, which is pretty cool, because that's important. That's a balance. That is a public value, a public good, and it's right for a landowner to get compensated for doing that, and it offsets that pressure, that economic pressure. Well, I got to sell this to be able to get the most out of this deal. And so we're doing everything we can, from easements, ecosystem services. We're looking hard at even more tax credits and tax exemptions for conservation lands. Right now, if you sell an easement, you get federal and sometimes local tax credits, tax benefits. But we're trying to build on that, and we want to make it more and more and more valuable to a landowner to hold and manage land for conservation. We also support cost share programs, a lot of cool federal and state and local cost share programs that help a landowner do prescribed burning and other management that's good for wildlife. We also have to work hard to engage the local community and engage in community planning at the local. That's where, you guys all know this, that's where decisions are made about properties and what's going to be protected, what's going to be developed. We want to be engaged so that local community knows the value of conservation land. And also transportation infrastructure planning, because that, you see from that map, a lot of the development, it's a no-brainer, a lot of the development happens around transportation corridors. And so any kind of new plan for new transportation corridors, if it cuts through those green places, we're going to have development. So we know those are things, it's a balance. It's not a battle, it's a balance. And having a seat at the table and helping Florida at all the different levels, federal, state, and local level, make decisions that are thoughtful and mindful of protecting wild places. Now, I'm hopeful about the future of Florida. Even though you saw that red on the map, I'm hopeful that those 33 million people are still going to have a special place when in 2070 they look around and want to go out in the wild. I am hopeful we can still do that. One of the things that has arisen in the last several years that, I'll tell you, much of my career with Fish and Wildlife was, how do we get people's attention? How do we get people to care about what's important, what's wild in Florida and those fish and wildlife? How do we have a core group of people that get it. And honestly, that core group has always been led by hunters and anglers. The hunters and anglers were the first to the table to say, we'll pay for conservation. And they've been doing it since the 1930s at the federal and state level through license fees, excise taxes. When you buy a shotgun, you pay an 11% excise tax on that shotgun. But hunters and anglers have been putting money where their heart is since the 30s. And we're trying, how can we get more people to embrace the value and importance of supporting, contributing to conservation? When the last few years in Florida, when I was here, this was starting to develop, the Florida Wildlife Corridor concept. And it has just blossomed. This whole idea of a corridor for wildlife across the state of Florida and what that means and how that matters has just taken off and captured the imagination of the people of Florida and the leadership, the political leadership of Florida, the governor, the legislature. They've embraced this. And there are a lot of really important people that helped tee this up, like Carl Ward and Arnie Bellini and people like that have embraced this and helped push this concept forward. And it resulted in $300 million appropriation to go buy land in the corridor, protect land. and do easements. It's not all about fee title. It's about doing easements on land and working with private landowners and providing those incentives. It's $300 million just focusing on what is in the Florida Wildlife Corridor. There's a lot of important wildlife habitat outside of the corridor, but this more than anything I've seen in my career, got the whole state of Florida's attention about what's important for wildlife. And now lands are being bought, lands are being protected, and it's strategic and thoughtful about what are the most important linkages and connections and corridors that are going to help a migratory duck when the duck flies down here for the winter. How do we have places for them to land and rest and feed, and all the way as they work their way down all the way to South Florida to the stormwater treatment area? Some people probably have been on and seen how cool that is. And these corridors and these connection points are important for migratory birds, they're important for bears, they're important for panthers, they're important for all wildlife species that maintain a connection. It's important for maintaining genetics and good genetic connections and healthy populations. So this is happening. And I mentioned payment for ecosystem services, another tool in the toolbox to help landowners. So we got a lot of reasons to be hopeful. And that's what I want to leave you with. I don't want to leave you thinking about, oh my goodness, 15 million people, I'm leaving. But where would you go that's better? Think about that. The state of Florida truly does care. And I see it, I feel it, and I'm heartened by the fact that the state of Florida, my home state, truly cares about the future of wild Florida. They know that conservation is an important part of what keeps Florida special. They understand it's a balancing act. The state does. And I'm not talking about political leadership, just it's political leadership and the people, the population. If you do survey after survey, people are going to tell you, yes, I care about it. We have a strong track record in Florida. I've already mentioned that from the days when we started buying land and protecting land and putting land into these kind of state-managed areas and linking up with federal lands, national forests, national parks. We have this strong track record to stand on. If we just woke up today and said, oh my goodness, we need to do something, we would be in trouble. But thanks to the leaders that came before us, that were visionary about a future for Florida, we stand on a good, firm foundation. We have about 10 million acres of land right now protected out of 34 million acres. And some people say, well, is that enough? Well, it's a good amount to build on. We still need to connect the dots. That's where we are today, connecting the dots, making sure these lands are linked up nicely and that we can still keep the encroachment at bay and to take away and cutting into those functioning ecological things that we think about. And the cool thing is to see how the state, the legislature, the governor is doubling down on the wildlife corridor and continuing to show support for that initiative. That just will bring such a benefit to what we're trying to accomplish today. So I am hopeful, and I believe Florida's in a good place now, and we still have work to do. We got to keep our eye on this ball and continue to support these kind of initiatives and efforts, and we will continue to keep wild places in Florida the way they are, special, and a place that you can go and enjoy with your kids, with your grandkids. I have grandkids now, and I can't wait to get them out fishing and doing those kind of things. So Florida is in good hands, and I feel good about it, and I just want to leave you with that. And I so appreciate the opportunity to come speak with you. And I looked over the list of people that have been at this podium before, and I'm like, okay, I'm not worthy, but thank you for having me. Thank you.
All right, our speakers agreed to take a few questions. If you would approach the microphone over here, and then we'll get started.
Thank you. Y'all be nice now. You know, I haven't come back that much in the 7 years I've been gone, but I feel a little more free to be able to talk now than I used to.
I have two questions.
Yes, sir.
Obviously, we saw the in-migration of desalination into the Everglades, and a lot has been done on that. The other side of the peninsula is a city called Miami, and they're running out of water. And the whole desalination issue that has been, the technology has grown in the Middle East. What is y'all's position on that? And then the second question is, there's chatter about building golf courses and resorts in federal land. How are you all addressing that issue?
Well, on the water supply, our position there is what we do out on the landscape helps protect and sustain our water supply. So we need all tools on the table. The desalinization is an important tool. My understanding is it's expensive to develop, but I think we've got to invest in all the tools that are necessary to keep water supply for our urban areas. And that is going to be a big, big deal going forward, and it's going to be a big investment that Florida's going to have to make. And that's where you figure what is the right balance and how much can you continue to rely on natural water supply and natural sources and protect that. We don't need to say we've got this silver bullet that's desalinization that's going to fix everything, because it's not. But it can supplement and augment as long as it's seen as a tool to add to that. With regard to the development on State Park, I kind of danced that dance a little bit when I was here with some ideas about doing some things on state parks. And I am not critical of those that are thinking outside the box. Are there ways we can improve our state lands? Are there ways we can connect people more with state lands? I'm not endorsing golf courses or any of that, but to me, the one thing I did see in that is it makes my point about how people in Florida care about wild places. It makes my point that the pushback that came from that is like, don't touch our state parks. And I would hope they'd feel the same way about wildlife management areas and things like that. But it was a clear message, and I wasn't surprised, but it does reinforce that people in Florida care about those places and want to protect them and see them as special.
Thank you.
Hey, Nick, welcome home.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. We're so glad that you're here, and I want to publicly just thank you for an incredible career of public service in our state. Our state's so much better because of your leadership over there. You know, I saw a lot of folks at other agencies come and go, and politics and played. But you and your scientists at FWC, they just did a tremendous job of following the science. And I saw you talked about being able to speak a little freely. I want to ask you a question about that. But I saw you traverse some really tough seas at the dais and the podium before a lot of policymakers over the years. You're a master. So here's my question, now that you're able to speak freely. The chatter, there's some chatter now about Florida getting maybe the entire Everglades restoration maybe turned back completely over to the state. Our governor would like to see that. I'd like to hear what you would think about that. I think we handle stuff really well. I know we've made an awful lot of attorneys really wealthy on the Everglades.
Sure.
There's been a lot of battles. But do you think Florida is ready to take care of that kind of thing?
Well, it depends. And again, how you structure a federal transition to state management. Throughout my career, was always an advocate for let the state be the first and foremost in managing our resources. And, you know, I pushed hard to get more authority over the Endangered Species Act and things like that. But and even in fisheries, you know, I fought for more authority for managing the red snapper fishery. So throughout my career, I've argued for state management. But when you talk about the Everglades, sometimes when you get in that dance, it's like we're going to let the state manage it, but the money's not going to keep flowing. You've got to find that there is a place for the federal government and the people of our nation to invest in these important, iconic landscapes. And I believe if there's a way to transition more to state leadership and implementing the actual work, I don't see it ever happening with the role of the Corps of Engineers and how integrated that is. But if it could happen, it would need to be done, one, in a thoughtful transition with continuing investments from our nation to those iconic. It can't be just here it is, you figure it out. Right. The federal apparatus created the situation we have in the Everglades. Right. So they owe it to, I think, the people of Florida and the people of the country. It's America's Everglades, right?
That's great, yeah.
And so I feel like that could work, and I would think it would be a benefit to have Florida have more say in how we manage the Everglades. I'd love that. But it's got to be done right.
Great. As he's walking over, talk a second about our flyways and our duck population in the country and how they're going. What's the most popular hunted species of that, or
Yes, sir. Yeah, well, as many of you probably know, the country migration of waterfowl is broken into flyways from the Atlantic across to the Pacific, and you've got the Mississippi and central flyways in the middle, and it all really comes down from the breeding grounds in Canada and the boreal forest and the prairies of Canada and part of the Dakotas, and that's where ducks nest and are produced, and that's where DU does a lot of its work, most meaningful work. But the flyways are where they migrate down to their winter grounds, like in Florida. Most of our waterfowl in Florida come from the Atlantic flyway, although some cross over from the Mississippi. And the most popular migratory species for hunting in Florida generally is a ringneck duck. And so you get that's a diver duck that migrates down it nests in the boreal forest. And so we do a lot of work up there to protect those nesting grounds so the birds will keep migrating. But we also get a lot of other species in Florida that really motivate people to get up really early and grab their decoys and their retriever and go slosh around in a marsh, even though you got to be careful with alligators, right? But waterfowl is really, Florida's kind of almost a forgotten state for waterfowl, because you can really, if you know what you're doing and where to go, you can find good waterfowl hunting. Just right here on the coast, you have a migration of redhead ducks that come down this coast all the way down to Texas, Laguna Madre, and they spend the winter here. And that can be some really cool hunting opportunities. But right now, waterfowl populations are at a good, strong level. We've had a couple of 2 or 3 drought years that have dropped it down a little bit. This year, we're kind of on a bubble as to whether it's going to be a good year or bad year. It really, what matters most in the prairies is rainfall and snowfall. And if the prairies are wet, the ducks go crazy and have a great time, and we got a lot of ducks. And if it's dry, not so much. So we have to watch for that balance. But right now, things are looking pretty good, and we hope to see a pretty good breeding season this year.
Don't tell everybody where to duck hunt. I mean, so a couple things. One, great work on the STAs. I know DU has partnered with the state. I'm a big fan. That's some great hunting down there. I know it does a lot for the water quality, so it's a win-win-win. So two-part. One, I do have concerns that at what point do we reach that's enough land and state ownership, right? I'm not sure they're the best stewards of land. You hope the money continues to flow to take care of it, but ideally I prefer when it can be done in a private hands. So I love all the programs you have to support that. So I'm just curious to get your thought, like when is enough, right? And then secondly, I'm curious to hear, because I know we have some duck species in South Florida that are not native. They've come in through, I think the Brazilian blackbelly came in with Hurricane Andrew. They're pretty much here now.
Yep, the whistling ducks.
I'm really interested to hear about how some of the other more typically invasive, the hogs, the snakes, things like that, are affecting particularly ducks.
Okay, well, so you're right about the more we can work with private lands and incentivize private land management, support that. I totally agree. That's a preferred model. But there still are places that if the state doesn't somehow step in or somebody step in to protect it, it just won't happen. And so that's where you have that trade-off of if it's a critical linkage, a critical part of a corridor for wildlife, then that's where I think there's still a place for the state to take a leadership role in either an acquisition or easement or something like that. But much prefer a model of, I agree with you, it's hard for the state to have enough staffing and funding capacity to do good management. There are places where we got good examples of that and places where we don't. But that's a dance that you got to keep dancing. But so with regard to the some of the exotics and invasive exotics and stuff, I was the guy that started the python hunt, and that's kind of gone crazy. I'll never forget the most cameras I ever saw in my life was when we opened that first hunt down in West Palm Beach. I couldn't believe how much that captures people's attention and imagination, but it's still that way. But as far as pythons and tegus and invasive exotics, there's not much impact on waterfowl, not much at all. It's pretty negligible. Now, python, if a duck swims by, a python's an ambush predator, it'll jump out and grab a duck, and wading birds and whatever. But from a population level, it's not a drop in the bucket as far as impact. Now, the pythons are impacting small mammal populations, native species of mammals and things like that, but not so much migratory birds. We're worried about wading birds down there, but any ducks, not so much. I don't see interesting, the dance between invasive exotics. When you think about plants, hydrilla is one of our most aggressive, invasive waterway plants in the world, and FWC has to manage through that, funding and figuring out where to treat, when to treat. Well, the ironic thing about hydrilla is ducks love it. So now I'm in a spot where my old agency's spraying these areas, and I have to call them and say, whoa, can you wait till after duck season? So anyway, it's interesting. Sometimes invasive exotics, and there's this, you don't think about it always about, maybe have some positive benefits for some species, but for the most part, there are some, the cat's out of the bag on a lot of these species, and we're just going to be in a management mode. We're never going to get rid of them. It's always going to be something we're going to have to spend money on and deal with, and that's another part of a growing state and balancing out and figuring out how to do it. Bernie? Oh, wait. Good to see you.
Great. Yes, sir. Good to see you. Thank you for your comments today. I want to follow up a little bit on Doug's question, because I think that as much as we all appreciate what DU does and other hunting organizations, and by the way, any tips on getting more ducks on our pond would be really appreciated.
Yes, sir.
But whereas y'all are trying to look for the balance, the environmental activist groups want to keep everything pristine, which means you can't hunt on it, you can't fish on it. I'm not suggesting ATVs or anything that's going to destroy those lands, but we need to make sure that you've got a better voice and a louder voice and more rational arguments than what the environmentalists have, because if we even get more land, and we do need land as we're growing, I very much agree with Doug on how much more land is really the question, but at least we have to be able to use that land. And then the second thing is just like to see what kind of comments, because when the earlier question about the feds, the first thing that comes to mind is the Army Corps of Engineers, and I really don't have anything good to say about them.
Well, there was a question there somewhere, maybe. But yeah, we, at Ducks Unlimited, we are the group that is going to come to the table and say, how can we work with you? We're not going to be the ones coming in throwing rocks like some of the environmental groups do. Some nonprofits build their business model around litigation, throwing rocks, give us money, we'll go sue, we'll try to influence policy or administrative decisions. That's not who we are. We are the group that's going to come down and say, here's some ideas for how to solve these problems. We want to work with you. Regardless of the political landscape, regardless of who's in office, we will sit down and say, let's find a way to work together. And honestly, throughout my career, conservation should be a nonpartisan issue. Everybody should find a place to support conservation. But when people go down the litigation path, it polarizes us. So we try to keep things where we can all be on sharing and working together and finding the right way to fix problems. And it works. We get doors open. We get opportunities to go sit down and make a difference. I think way more than some of those groups that are just throwing rocks. And so, and if you, I'm happy to have a sidebar with you. And Dr. J can probably give you tips on how to get more ducks in your pond too. Yes, sir. Oh, the Army Corps? I don't know what to say about that, because I tried to work with them when I was here, and we work with them. Honestly, we have to get 404 permits to do what we do. That's one of the crazy things. You got to go through as much permitting to do something good to restore a marsh as you would to go drain it and build a shopping center. It's crazy. And so the regulatory stuff and the Corps, it's maddening. I actually had to clear a little canal at Fish Eating Creek one time and got in big trouble with the Army Corps of Engineers and EPA. So I'm not a fan of that regulatory piece, but there are things I've worked with the Corps where they've done some good things, and they've come around and they've actually done the right thing. But it's not always easy. You just got to get in with them and try to find a way to get them to work with you, and it's tough. Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm interested with the projections you were discussing about population growth in Florida as to where these people are going to be, and more particularly whether your organization has a philosophy about how to accommodate them. I mean, essentially, I think about development for more people as either vertical or horizontal.
Right, you're right.
And, we've seen, obviously, down in South Florida, I used to live in Miami. And you've seen how vertical that's gone, and the reason, of course, is like the ocean to one side and they've got the Everglades to
Exactly.
the other.
That's all
And
that's left. You're right.
That's what's left to you, that's right. But elsewhere, you know, we've got a lot of financial pressure from storms and insurance costs and all that are going to start moving people more and more, I predict. I've been wrong before, but move them more away
Inland,
from
yeah.
the coast.
You're right.
And unless you want to have vertical development of them so that you conserve more land, use up less land in order to accommodate these people, unless you're going to have more condos, you know, high-rises
Yes.
or whatever, you're going to just gradually be fighting kind of a losing war about
Yes.
trying to prevent that. But each of them has its downsides, of course. And I'm just wondering if your organization has a philosophy looking forward toward this growth as to whether you prefer vertical or horizontal growth.
Well, you know, you talk about thinking about building sustainable communities in Florida and what that means, and the footprint is important. So we certainly would prefer to see smaller footprint developments, and so that gets you vertical. So horizontal is going to take more land, and I think Florida's got to be a mix, because you're not going to be able to just draw a line in this end and say no more single-story homes in Florida. You're going to have to, it's again a balancing act of where you allow those kind of developments to happen and what kind of land you're taking away, and where it's what and where those developments occur that we have to engage in. And what we try to do is bring solutions to the table. Babcock Ranch is a great example of a sustainable community that was built on a landscape that preserved a lot of land around it. And they also thought about how to have a sustainable water supply and power and things like that. So we need probably more of that kind of thinking about building sustainable. But it is horizontal. It's not vertical. But you're right. We need to work to push more of that concentrating development and living space in that way. So I totally we would be supportive of that trend.
Please join me in thanking our speaker for his time. On behalf of the Economic Club, we've got a small token of our appreciation. Thank you for that insightful conversation. I was thinking to the vertical versus horizontal, and you're one of the few organizations that lives in a pyramid. So it seems like you've cut the middle of that. Thank you all. We are adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you. That was good.